Roy, from Bowling Green, Kentucky. How would you have booked Diamond Dallas Page's WWE run? What could creative have done to make his run more meaningful? Do you think they dropped the ball on making DDP a player in WWE? Come on, Roy. Of course they did. Absolutely they dropped the ball with DDP. DDP was, I would say that DDP in WCW probably peaked, or the peak of his popularity probably was end of 98 into 90, maybe even the first half of 99. The stuff he was doing towards the end, the Jersey Triad stuff and all that, I mean, the hell with that. That, to me, is the DDP that I remember, 97, 98. You know, they tried to give him the rub even, you know, when they did the stuff with Malone and Dennis Rodman. DDP was in there as the partner. I think even the Jay Leno stuff. And then the Halloween Havoc match with Goldberg, one of the best matches of Goldberg's career, where I think they absolutely could have done the title switch there if they were going to, you know, beat the undefeated streak. I would have rather have seen them do that than have him lose the way he did to Kevin Nash. But DDP was one of the few kind of homemade WCW stars. I never saw, I'm not saying that he was at the same level as like Sting, right? Because Sting had a lot of seniority. He was there for so many years. Sting, in a lot of ways, he was the icon. He was the franchise of WCW. But when I look at like the homemade, homegrown WCW stars, I think of Sting, I think of Goldberg, I think of DDP, and I think of Booker T. And that's it, honestly. I mean, I guess maybe you could say Scott Steiner, but there were not a lot of other names that really were made. Big names that were made by WCW. After that, you kind of get into the lower tier guys there, Jericho, Eddie Guerrero. Those guys got an opportunity to be on TV, but they were never pushed at a high level until they left and went to WWE. So here they have a guy in DDP who is one of the few truly big names that WCW cultivated and created, and who got over. He got over on his own. He had one of the most popular finishes in wrestling. You could hit it from anywhere. It was a great move. He had a great act. He had a lot of fan support. And he was one of only, I believe, two with Booker T, WCW stars who I think either took a buyout or actually lost money to go to WWE instead of sitting at home, which he probably could have done and just collected a paycheck from Turner. That's what Goldberg did. That's what Hogan and Hall and Nash and all of them did. Booker and DDP were the only ones who didn't take the money. They wanted to go to WWE. They thought that they could really do good things and big things. And they wanted to go and be part of that and contribute. And then you see how he debuted and what happened after he debuted. He never stood a chance. Are you kidding me? This guy never stood a chance. How can you stand when they cut your legs out from underneath you? He did not stand a chance. First of all, the entire premise of the invasion angle was flawed from day one because they brought all of those guys in as the invaders, right? Heel invaders. And look, if you wanted to do that, then go ahead and do it. But here's why it was flawed. They bring these guys in as the heel invaders from that other company. And yet they made plans to give Monday Night Raw, the Monday Night Raw slot on USA, to WCW. That was at one point the plan. Jim Ross has talked about this. He was involved in some of this planning. Right up until the very end before Vince McMahon, what we saw with Booker T and Buff Bagwell, that infamous match in Tacoma in the main event of Monday Night Raw. And then Vince McMahon just completely blew up all their plans and said, yeah, you know what? We're not going to do WCW after all. But that was at one point their plan. They thought that they were going to basically make Raw Nitro. And they were going to give SmackDown to the WWF roster. So you'd have a WWF show on Thursdays and you'd have the WCW show on Mondays. They were going to keep it as a separate brand. And I'm just like, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking to myself, how do you expect your audience, who you have conditioned for years to believe that WCW is the enemy, they are the devil, they're trying to put us out of business, which Bischoff was trying to do, but doesn't mean everybody else wanted that to happen. But they're the enemy. They're the bad guys. That's all they conditioned their audience to believe for years and years. And all of a sudden, you think these same people are going to go ahead and gladly tune into a WCW-only program with no WWE talent? The whole idea was doomed to fail regardless of what happened with Booker T and Buff Bagwell. DDP should have been brought in as Diamond Dallas Page, the People's Champion character that he played in 97 into 98, not the Jersey Triad stuff, like I said, and all the stuff he was doing towards the end. Forget that. I could tell you to forget a lot of the creative stuff that WCW was doing in late 99 into 2000. DDP is hardly the only one. You bring him in that way. You don't bring him in as some stalker sniffing out the Undertaker's wife's panties. He should have been the guy giving people the diamond cutter and then going into the crowd and throwing up the diamond sign and banging people, or doing the bang sign. You know what I mean. Oh, well, they put him in a feud with The Undertaker. That's pretty big. The stuff with The Undertaker's wife, that was just a way in storyline for DDP to get inside The Undertaker's head. I've heard that justification before for the storyline. Okay, Einstein, then what happened? Tell me what happened after that. Let's say I buy that premise, that it wasn't a bad idea. It was a little unconventional, but the whole premise, let's say, was that he didn't care about The Undertaker's wife. But let's look at this storyline from a logical perspective here, okay? Let's look at this, and let's say he's only doing it to play mind games with The Undertaker. He got inside the guy's head and it worked. Okay, then what happened? Tell me then what happened. Undertaker gave him nothing. Not a damn thing. They didn't even have a match at the King of the Ring. That wasn't a match. Undertaker just beat the shit out of this guy for a few minutes and then he ran him off. He literally ran away. And they played The Undertaker's music and that was it. And then a few weeks later, DDP is on Monday Night Raw being pinned in the middle of the ring by The Undertaker's wife. Now granted, it was with an assist from The Undertaker, but nonetheless, I will never forget the visual of Sarah folding over DDP's arms, doing the Undertaker pose, and pinning him. 1, 2, 3. Undertaker may not have had the reputation that guys like Hogan and Shawn Michaels and Triple H had for playing politics or burying people. He's the locker room leader. He's the soul of the WWE. But in this case, I don't think The Undertaker gets enough shit from people for killing DDP. He gave that man absolutely nothing, and he buried him 6 feet under. And he deserves to be called, which is funny, he's an Undertaker, right? But he deserves to be called out for it. He gets a pass because of who he is. He doesn't deserve a pass on this. He deserves to be called out. He pulled the same shit that some of those other guys have pulled with other guys over the years. DDP, when he came into WWE, was 45 years old. He was not a young man. He was not a young man when he started wrestling. He was 35, I think, before he had his first match. But he was 45 years old when he debuted on Monday Night Raw, and he was gone less than a year later because of an injury. I think it was his back, and that was pretty much the end of his career. You had a very short window to make money with this guy. There was no time to mess around. Go back and listen to the pop that he got the night on Raw when he unmasked as the Stalker. He got a bigger reaction than Ric Flair got in Charlotte later that year when he debuted on Monday Night Raw. When Ric Flair, the night after Survivor Series, when they ended the whole alliance and the whole invasion angle, and out comes Ric Flair, right, to tell Vince McMahon that you and I now are co-owners and blah, blah, blah. When Flair came out, I remember thinking, man, that's it. I mean, the guy's in Charlotte, he's in the Carolinas, and this is the reaction that he gets. DDP got a bigger reaction coming out on Raw and unmasking as the stupid Stalker than Ric Flair got in Charlotte later that year. That tells you something. Or at least that's how it came across to me on TV. And they squandered it. He got this huge reaction and they squandered it. And we have to listen to Bruce Prichard, when he was pressed on this on his podcast, talk about how, well, DDP wasn't, because, look, Conrad, I'll give Conrad credit. He pushed Prichard on this and he's like, well, why wouldn't you just let him come in as DDP, the people's champ and all that? And Prichard goes, well, because nobody in our audience even knew who he was. Completely ignoring the reaction that he got his very first night in the company. He didn't even have the long hair. He had like the short hair. He didn't even look like DDP did in 97 and 98. And when he pulled the mask off, believe me, people in the building that night, they knew exactly who that guy was. It's like, to be Bruce Prichard, it's like it never even happened. It's like his feed went out that night and he missed the entire segment. I especially liked his argument that, well, you know, if DDP as that character was so over in WCW, then WCW wouldn't have gone out of business. Two things on that. Number one, he completely shits on every top star in WCW when he says something like that. He shits on Sting, he shits on Goldberg, he shits on Booker T, he shits on DDP, he shits on Ric Flair. That's a lot of shit. He shits on every single one of them when he makes a stupid comment like that. You could say that about every single one of those guys. Well, gosh, you know, I mean, if Sting was so over, if Ric Flair was so over, then I guess WCW wouldn't have gone out of business. Completely ignoring the shit show that was WCW creative there in those last 2 years. It is a dumb argument. You can blame a lot of people for why a lot of guys weren't over at the end of WCW. That's number one. Number two, what if the shoe was on the other foot and Stone Cold came to WCW and they said to Stone Cold, hey, listen, we're going to bring you in, but you can't cuss, you can't drink, okay? No drinking beer. You can't do all of the things that got you over, but go out there and make it work. Austin is talented enough where maybe he could have gone out there and made it work, but boy, it would have been a lot harder for him, right? Or go tell The Rock, hey, listen, you know, you're going to get half the mic time that you had when you were in WWE because we just don't have time, right? We have a short window, so you don't really have a lot of time on the mic, and you can't do the eyebrow anymore, and no more people's elbow because we don't want you doing that. But go out there and get over. Again, Rock was charismatic enough. He probably could have made it work, but it would have been a lot harder. They would have handicapped him, but I think in the end he probably would have been okay. Those guys are going to have a hell of a time, though, getting over in front of that WCW audience because they want The Rock. They want Stone Cold. They don't want half a Rock. They don't want half a Stone Cold. And that's kind of what they gave them with DDP when he came to WWE. This Prichard is so far up his own ass on some of these podcasts. It is absolutely nauseating. He should have come in doing DDP the way that he got over in 98. And then what you do is you build to the whole People's Champ against People's Champ thing with him and The Rock. And yes, The Rock would go over. I would not have DDP beat The Rock. Not at all. But I do think that match had some marquee value. Maybe not the marquee value that Austin versus Goldberg would have had. Not the marquee value even, I think, that Sting and The Undertaker. If The Undertaker were still doing the Dead Man character. Because Sting and the American Badass doesn't really make any sense. There were other dream matches that were bigger than what DDP and The Rock would have been. But I think DDP and The Rock, you know, yeah, I think that could have worked. I wouldn't have done it right out of the gate. You would have built to it. Maybe he does a program first with somebody like Jericho. Then he kind of graduates to The Rock and they could do that match at SummerSlam, you know, in 2001. This is not a year-long build type of thing. This is not necessarily, oh, let's build it to WrestleMania 18 the following year. DDP came in, 45 years old, still had some value. Let's get this done. This is a big match. It's an attraction. The Diamond Cutter is still over. Let's get this done. That's what I would have done. And they buried him. For no reason. They buried him. And you wonder why Sting kept his distance from that company for so long and why he was so paranoid and afraid to go to WWE. It doesn't surprise me. Years later, when he's doing an interview and he says he was concerned. He saw what they did to some of the guys that they brought in from WCW. Some of the silly stuff that they had them doing. And his fear was that they wouldn't be bringing him in to make money with him. They would be bringing him in to prove a point. And to kind of bury him or make him look silly and make it very clear that the WWE guys are better than the WCW guys. Even though Vince McMahon owned the whole goddamn thing at that point. But that's the mentality of some of these people in wrestling. They're so petty and they're so stupid and short-sighted that, you know what? Sting probably made the right choice. I wish he would have come in sooner than he did. Even 5 years earlier than he did. I think that he had just stayed a little too long in TNA. But I don't at all blame him for feeling that way and not coming into WWE when he did. And when you hear Prichard and people like that in the inner circle talk about these things, you can understand exactly why he would have felt the way that he did.